Hi everyone, I'm Kevin, and this is HFX by Bike, a channel all about getting around Halifax by bike. I made a video recently showcasing the Vernon Bikeway connecting the west and south ends of the Halifax Peninsula. It runs for just over a kilometer along Vernon and Seymour Streets. Here's an overhead view of the Bikeway. For the most part, it's just a regular local street with widened curbs at intersections to slow down cars making turns. There are sign-only modal filters on Quinpool, Jubilee, and Coburg. At each, cars can turn onto intersecting road, but they're not legally permitted to proceed straight through. Bikes can, though. The intersections at Quinpool and Coburg have mini bike lanes that let bikes wait for the signal change when they're heading in a bike-only direction. The ones at Coburg even have a cool radar system that'll flip the signal priority whenever they detect a bike. The most complex section of the Bikeway is Quingate Place, where we have a major intersection, a connection to Windsor Street, angled parking with poor visibility, heavy pedestrian and motor vehicle traffic, and delivery trucks making frequent passes through the area. In my opinion, Vernon is the best bikeway in the city. So what's there even to fix? There are two big things I think could be improved. The first is Quingate Place, essentially the space between Quinpool Road and the multi-use path connecting to Windsor Street. In my video, this one section contributed half of the negative points I gave to the bikeway. Between the angled parking facing the wrong way, the lack of a straight-through lane for the bike crossing at Quinpool, and the large empty space connecting to the multi-use path, I think the entire area could do with a rethink to make it easier and safer to bike through. The other major issue I want to address is traffic. The concept of a bikeway is such that, as much as possible, car traffic is limited to local residents. The bikeway itself is accessible to cars, but should be essentially useless for getting around by car otherwise. So, in theory, there's no such thing as rush hour car traffic on the bikeway. Despite this, anyone who uses Vernon regularly will confirm that there's a lot of cars during rush hour, especially in the space between Jubilee and Quinpool. So, my main goals are going to be to patch up Quingate Place and reduce rush hour traffic on the bikeway. For Quingate Place, there's some low-hanging fruit. The angled parking on the east side of the street is oriented such that drivers back out of the spot with minimal visibility for oncoming bike or car traffic. So an easy fix would be to just make the parking spots compliant with the city's own design guides and swap the orientation to run northwest instead of northeast. This means drivers will be directly facing traffic and make collisions less likely. Next, the weird paved lot at the northeast corner of the street can just go away. It gets used for legal parking and as an informal storage area for who happens to get to it first, often blocking access or reducing visibility coming off the multi-use path. If there's no formal use for the space, the curb can just be extended or to remove it entirely. You can also do things like extend the median and add crosswalks, but basically any design that removes the quasi-parking lot from the middle of an active transport corridor would be a huge improvement. At the intersection crossing Quinpool, cars are required to divert either left or right, whereas bikes can proceed in any direction. The lanes are marked for left and right only, which can probably be confusing for other road users trying to figure out what bikes are going to do. An easy fix is just to add a bike box to the road surface at the front of the left lane. This gives bikes additional priority for a short signal phase and clarifies where bikes are supposed to be and where they're going. I think that solves most of the issues with Quingate Place, so let's talk about the bigger issue: traffic. The bikeway has traffic diversions at its three main intersections, and if there's still rush hour traffic making its way onto the bikeway, then we need to figure out where it's coming from and where it's going before we can design a solution. It could be that people are routinely ignoring the honor code filters, or it could be that most of the traffic is legal but still kind of dysfunctional. So I did what any normal person would do, and I went across the street, bought a coffee, and counted traffic during morning rush hour. In total, there were 303 road users during rush hour, splitting roughly 80-20 between cars and bikes. 70% of car traffic was entering the bikeway, which again should have no utility for drivers unless they live there. To figure out where the cars are coming from, I recorded the intersection at the entrance of the bikeway on Quinpool on another day. 38% were northbound, coming from the direction of the Armdale roundabout, and 61% were southbound, coming from primarily Windsor Street. To figure out where the traffic is going, I headed to the Jubilee intersection and counted cars another day. At the four-way stop, 77.7% of cars made a left turn, 14.8% went right, and the remainder, 7.4%, proceeded illegally straight through the intersection. This paints a pretty good picture of what's happening during rush hour. Cars are coming in from a mix of directions, but the majority are coming from the right-only exit from Windsor Street, getting to the Bikeway and using it to avoid traffic on Robie Street by using the lights at Jubilee. There are a couple ways that we can prevent this. The first approach would just be to switch the mode filter at Jubilee from being enforced by the honor system to being backed by a physical barrier. In this case, a median barrier made up of flex posts would be a good worthwhile interim build. The city has done something similar to this on the Isleville Bikeway where it intersects with K Street in the north end, so this isn't really that of a wacky idea. In practice, this means that cars wouldn't be able to cross Jubilee along the Bikeway. Legally, they already can't, but this would make it mostly impossible. A consequence of adding a physical barrier is that some currently legal movements through the intersection would also be blocked. Namely, cars would no longer be able to make left-hand turns at the Jubilee-Vernon intersection. I don't think this would represent a major inconvenience for people living on the Bikeway. The neighborhood has a grid-like design, and so Jubilee can be accessed with a left turn one block over in either direction. The big question is whether this would solve the problem at all, and I'm not so sure. The same grid structure that would allow residents to bypass the barrier to access Jubilee would also allow drivers rat running the Bikeway to split off before the barrier and still get to Robie Street. A barrier would need to be placed on Cherry Street to remove access to the Jubilee-Robie intersection, and even then, every street that intersects with the Bikeway north of Jubilee connects to Robie anyways. Every street before whatever barrier is placed is still a potential exit to Robie. The closer the barrier placement gets to Quinpool, the smaller the share of the Bikeway is useful as a shortcut around rush hour traffic, and this leads straight into the second approach. Okay, hear me out. The only movements cars can legally make at this intersection can be accomplished a few blocks west at Quinpool and Preston, or just by navigating to Robie Street directly. So there's nothing unique about this intersection that drivers would miss out on. Rather than making trips along the Bikeway pointless for cars by blocking access to the destination at Robie and Jubilee, this approach just blocks entry to the Bikeway entirely. The main effect would be to make the Bikeway useless as a way for cars to escape rush hour traffic. But that would have some other effects too. The first is that more of the block could be dedicated to uses other than just moving cars. This could take the form of more space for the nearby businesses, greenery, or even a bike share stand if the city ever gets around to making one. The traffic being mostly limited to bikes, there's even more space for street parking, if someone wanted more of that for some reason. There are some logistics to work out, like how deliveries to this part of the street would work, but I don't see anything that would preclude it from working at all. The second effect would be that the left turn lane on Quinpool that exclusively feeds onto Vernon would no longer have a purpose. It's out of scope for this video, but I'm sure people can think up some creative uses for an extra lane of space on one of the most heavily congested arterials in the city. You might be wondering how bikes traveling west along Quinpool would make the left-hand turn onto the Bikeway without that lane being there, but we actually already solved that by installing the bike box on Quingate. Just continue in the rightmost lane, pop into the box, and wait for the signal to change. Easy. The last effect is that all of the traffic currently rat running along the Bikeway would be pushed onto nearby major roads, with Robie Street taking the majority of the share of the burden. This would make rush hour worse on streets like Robie, but I don't think that's the Bikeway's problem. The function of the Bikeway is specifically not to absorb traffic. So those are some ways that I think we could fix the Vernon Bikeway. Most of the changes I've pitched are nothing more than putting down a half dozen flex posts and repainting some parking spaces. It could, for the most part, be implemented over the course of an afternoon by a small team of volunteers. The big battle really isn't over how much this kind of project would cost, but in getting people to accept that bikes should have priority on their own Bikeway. Anyways, that's all I've got for this one. If you like this kind of thing, subscribe to the channel for more, and let me know in the comments how you would improve the Vernon Bikeway. As always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.